In a small coastal town where the ocean breeze carried whispers of secrets untold, life moved at its own gentle rhythm. The town wasn't known for anything extraordinary, just quiet streets lined with colorful cottages, friendly faces greeting each other at the market, and evenings spent watching the sun dip below the horizon. It was here that Evelyn Harper arrived one crisp autumn morning, her suitcase in hand and an air of mystery about her. Evelyn didn't stand out when she first came to town. She dressed simply, spoke softly, and kept mostly to herself. People assumed she was just another person looking for a fresh start away from the chaos of city life. And they were right, at least partially. What no one knew was that Evelyn had once lived a very different life, far removed from sewing curtains or volunteering at the community center. But that part of her story was buried deep beneath layers of silence, hidden even from those who smiled at her every day. She rented a cozy little cottage near the edge of town, close enough to hear the waves crash against the shore on windy nights. By day, she worked as a seamstress, mending clothes and stitching quilts for neighbors who admired her skillful hands. In the afternoons, she'd often walk down to the community center, where she helped organize events or assisted with arts and crafts, sessions for kids. Everyone liked Evelyn. She had a kind smile and a calm presence that made people feel comfortable around her. No one suspected that beneath her unassuming exterior lay a past filled with standing ovations, glittering chandeliers and melodies that could move entire audiences to tears. One chilly Tuesday evening, while Evelyn was folding fabric scraps, in the corner of the community center, Margaret, the enthusiastic music teacher, approached her with a hopeful grin. Margaret was the heart of the local choir, always buzzing with energy and ideas. She loved bringing people together through music, whether it was teaching toddlers how to clap along to nursery rhymes or convincing retirees to belt out old folk songs. "Hey, Evelyn," Margaret said, plopping down onto the chair next to her. "I need your help." Evelyn looked up from her work, surprised. "My help? With what?" "Well," Margaret hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "We're putting together a performance for the spring concert and we're short on soloists. I was wondering if you'd consider singing something, just a small piece. It doesn't have to be fancy." Evelyn froze for a moment, her needle hovering midair. Singing was the last thing she wanted to do. For years, she'd avoided anything remotely connected to her former life, determined to leave it all behind. But Margaret's request caught her off guard. How could she possibly explain without revealing too much? "I don't think so," Evelyn replied gently, shaking her head. "I'm not really a singer." Margaret tilted her head, studying Evelyn curiously. "Are you sure? You have such a lovely voice when you talk. I bet you'd sound amazing if you tried." Evelyn chuckled nervously, trying to brush off the compliment. "Trust me, it's better if I stick to sewing." But Margaret wasn't ready to give up yet. Over the next few days, she casually dropped hints whenever they crossed paths. "You know, Evelyn, everyone has a song inside them," she'd say with a wink. "Or even humming counts as practice." At first, Evelyn found these comments amusing, but eventually they started wearing her down. Margaret's persistence was hard to resist. She had a way of making people believe in themselves, even when they doubted their own abilities. Finally, unable to ignore Margaret's enthusiasm any longer, Evelyn agreed to attend one of the choir rehearsals. "Just to see what it's like," she promised. Secretly, though, she hoped that showing up would put an end to Margaret's relentless encouragement. The rehearsal took place in the community center's modest auditorium, a room with peeling paint on the walls and mismatched chairs arranged in rows. Despite its humble appearance, the space buzzed with excitement as members gathered, chatting animatedly about the upcoming concert. Evelyn slipped into a seat near the back, hoping to blend into the background. Margaret greeted everyone warmly before turning her attention to the group. "All right, folks, let's run through O Mio Babino Caro again. This is our big number and we need someone special to take the lead. Any volunteers?" No one raised their hand. The aria was notoriously difficult, requiring both technical skill and emotional depth. Most of the choir members exchanged nervous glances, clearly intimidated by the challenge. Margaret sighed dramatically. "Come on, Don't make me beg. We need a diva for this one, a real powerhouse. Then, almost as an afterthought, she turned to Evelyn and joked, maybe we should ask Evelyn. She's probably hiding some incredible talent under that shy exterior. Everyone laughed, including Evelyn, though her laughter sounded forced. Margaret gave her a playful nudge. Go ahead, Evelyn, just try it. You don't have to sing the whole thing, just a few lines to show us what you've got. Evelyn felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't sung in public since leaving her old life behind, and the thought of doing so now terrified her. Still, something in Margaret's earnest expression made it impossible to refuse. Slowly, reluctantly, she stood up and walked toward the piano. Her knees wobbled slightly as she positioned herself in front of the microphone. The pianist gave her an encouraging nod, and then the opening chords began. For a brief moment, Evelyn considered bolting out of the room. But then she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let the music guide her. When she opened her mouth, the sound that emerged was nothing short of breathtaking. Her voice soared effortlessly, rich and resonant, filling the room with a warmth that left everyone speechless. As she sang, memories flooded back, the thrill of performing on grand stages, the roar of applause, the weight of expectations. Yet somehow this moment felt different. There were no spotlights, no critics scribbling notes in the shadows, just a handful of ordinary people listening with wide-eyed wonder. By the time she reached the final note, the entire room was silent. Then, as if snapping out of a trance, the choir erupted into applause. People clapped and cheered, their faces glowing with admiration. Even the pianist turned to stare at Evelyn, his jaw hanging open in disbelief. Margaret, however, was completely stunned. She stared at Evelyn, her mouth forming words that wouldn't come out. Finally, she managed to stammer, That was incredible. Where did you learn to sing like that? Evelyn forced a smile, her cheeks flushing red. It's been a long time, she murmured vaguely, avoiding eye contact. Inside, though, her heart raced. She'd revealed more than she intended, and now she worried that her secret might slip further out of her control. As the rehearsal continued, Margaret couldn't stop thinking about Evelyn's performance. Something about it felt familiar, like a distant memory tugging at the edges of her mind. Later that night, unable to shake the feeling, she decided to dig deeper. Little did Evelyn know, her quiet life in the small coastal town was about to change forever. Evelyn's impromptu performance at the choir rehearsal left an indelible mark on everyone present. The room buzzed with excitement long after she had sat back down, her face flushed and her hands trembling slightly. Margaret couldn't contain her enthusiasm, pacing back and forth in front of the group as if struck by lightning. "Do you realize what just happened?" Margaret exclaimed, her voice rising with every word. "That was magical, absolutely magical. Evelyn, why didn't you tell us you could sing like that?" Evelyn shifted uncomfortably in her seat, avoiding eye contact. She gave a small shrug, trying to play it off as no big deal. "It's just something I used to do," she said softly, her tone carrying a hint of finality. But Margaret wasn't about to let it go so easily. "Just something you used to do?" Margaret repeated, incredulously. "Evelyn, most people spend years training to sound even half as good as that. You can't just brush it off like it's nothing." The other choir members chimed in, their voices blending into a chorus of admiration. One woman leaned over and patted Evelyn's arm. "You've got to sing at the concert now. We'll never find anyone else who can pull off that area." Another man nodded eagerly. "Yeah, you're our secret weapon. No one will see it coming." Evelyn forced a polite smile but shook her head firmly. "I'm sorry, but I can't. It's not who I am anymore." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Margaret frowned, sensing there was more to Evelyn's reluctance than met the eye. Still, she decided not to push too hard, at least not right then. Instead, she changed tactics, appealing to Evelyn's sense of community. "Look, we're all doing this for fun. It's not about being perfect or impressing anyone. It's about sharing something beautiful together. And trust me, your voice is beautiful." Evelyn hesitated, torn between her desire to stay hidden and the warmth of Margaret's sincerity. Finally, she relented just a little. "Maybe I'll think about it," she murmured, though deep down she knew she wouldn't change her mind. Over the next few days, Evelyn found herself replaying the rehearsal in her mind. She hadn't intended to sing that night, hadn't wanted to draw attention to herself, but somehow the music had taken over. For those brief moments, she'd felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. Yet, as soon as the song ended, reality came crashing back. The weight of her past loomed large, reminding her why she'd chosen to leave it behind. Despite her reservations, Evelyn couldn't ignore the ripple effect her performance had created. Word spread quickly through the tight-knit town, fueled by Margaret's infectious excitement. Neighbors stopped her on the street to ask if the rumors were true, that quiet Evelyn Harper could belt out an opera solo like a professional. At first, Evelyn laughed it off, brushing aside the compliments with self-deprecating humor. But the more people pressed her, the harder it became to maintain her facade. Margaret, meanwhile, was consumed by curiosity. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Evelyn's story than she was letting on. Late one evening, sitting alone in her cozy living room with a cup of tea, Margaret pulled out her laptop and began searching online. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she typed in keywords: female opera singer, powerful voice, disappeared from stage. As page after page of results loaded, Margaret scrolled absent-mindedly until one name caught her eye: Isabella D'Angelo. The name rang a distant bell, stirring memories of articles she'd read years ago. Intrigued, she clicked on a link to a video clip and pressed play. Within seconds, her jaw dropped. The recording showed a stunning woman, standing center stage, bathed in golden light. Her gown shimmered under the spotlight as she sang with a voice that seemed to transcend time and space. Margaret listened intently, her heart pounding as realization dawned. The resemblance was uncanny, not just in the voice, but in the way the singer carried herself, the subtle tilt of her head, the emotion etched into every note. "No way," Margaret whispered, rewinding the clip to hear it again. This time, she paid closer attention to the details: the year of the performance, the accolades listed in the description, the speculation surrounding Isabella's sudden exit from the opera world. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. Margaret sat back, stunned. Could it really be true? Was Evelyn Harper the same person as Isabella D'Angelo? If so, why had she disappeared? And why had she chosen this tiny coastal town to start anew? For a moment, Margaret debated confronting Evelyn directly, but something held her back. She knew how fragile trust could be, especially when it came to matters of identity. Instead, she resolved to observe, to gather more information before making any assumptions. After all, Evelyn had entrusted her with a glimpse of her soul during that rehearsal. The least Margaret could do was respect her privacy. For now. The following week, Margaret invited Evelyn to join her for coffee at the local cafe. It was a casual outing, meant to seem spontaneous rather than calculated. As they sipped their drinks and chatted about mundane topics, Margaret carefully steered the conversation toward music. "You know," Margaret began casually, "I've always loved opera, even though I don't understand half of what they're singing about. There's just something so powerful about it, isn't there?" Evelyn nodded slowly, her expression guarded. "Yes, it's unique. Not everyone appreciates it, but those who do tend to feel it deeply." Margaret seized the opening. "Have you ever seen Isabella D'Angelo perform? She was huge a few years back, or maybe you're too young to remember." A flicker of emotion crossed Evelyn's face, so fleeting that Margaret almost missed it. "I've heard of her," Evelyn replied evenly, taking a sip of her coffee. Her voice was supposed to be extraordinary. "It was," Margaret agreed, watching Evelyn closely. But then she vanished without a trace. Some say she burned out. Others think she fell in love and retired. "What do you think happened?" Evelyn shrugged, feigning indifference. "Who knows? Maybe she just needed a break from the spotlight." Margaret smiled faintly, sensing the deflection. "Well, whoever she was, she must have been incredible. Kind of like someone else I know. Evelyn met her gaze briefly before looking away, her cheeks tinged with pink. Don't get any ideas, Margaret. I'm not cut out for that kind of life anymore. Margaret raised her hands in mock surrender. Hey, I'm just saying. It's a shame such talent goes unnoticed. That's all. Though Evelyn didn't respond, Margaret could see the wheels turning in her mind. She knew she was getting closer to the truth, but she also understood that prying further might drive Evelyn away entirely. For now, patience was key. As the weeks passed, Evelyn found herself drawn back to the community center, albeit reluctantly. Margaret's persistence was matched only by her genuine kindness, and Evelyn couldn't help but admire her determination. Slowly but surely, she began attending rehearsals more frequently, though she still refused to commit to performing at the concert. Still, Margaret noticed subtle changes in Evelyn's demeanor. She seemed lighter somehow, as if shedding layers of armor she'd worn for far too long. During breaks, she started chatting with other choir members, sharing stories about her travels and experiences. Though she remained tight-lipped about her past, her walls were beginning to crack, and Margaret knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the rehearsal room, Margaret approached Evelyn with a gentle smile. You know, Evelyn, I've been thinking. Music has a funny way of bringing people together. It doesn't matter where you come from or what you've done, it's about connection. And I think you're starting to feel that, aren't you? Evelyn paused, her eyes softening as she considered Margaret's words. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future where her gift didn't define her, but didn't have to remain buried either. I'll think about it, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, but this time Margaret detected a note of hope beneath the uncertainty. Evelyn's decision to attend rehearsals more regularly was a small but significant step. At first, she told herself it was just to keep Margaret happy, to repay her for all the kindness and patience she'd shown. But deep down, Evelyn knew there was more to it. The music had awakened something inside her, stirring emotions she thought she'd buried forever. Sitting in that modest rehearsal room, surrounded by people who sang purely for the joy of it, she felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in years. Margaret noticed the change immediately. Evelyn wasn't just showing up anymore, she was participating. She offered suggestions during practice, helped newer members find their pitch, and even laughed at Margaret's corny jokes about hitting the high notes. It was as if a weight had lifted off her shoulders, allowing her to relax and enjoy herself. Still, whenever the topic of performing at the concert came up, Evelyn clammed up, deflecting with light-hearted comments or changing the subject altogether. One evening, after a particularly lively rehearsal, Margaret decided to take a different approach. Instead of pressuring Evelyn directly, she invited her to stay behind for a chat. The two women sat on folding chairs near the piano, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead filling the silence between them. You know, Margaret began, her tone casual but deliberate. There's something I've been meaning to ask you. Evelyn raised an eyebrow, instantly wary. Oh? What's that? Margaret hesitated, choosing her words carefully. When you sang O mio babino caro that night, well, it reminded me of someone famous. Evelyn stiffened, her fingers gripping the edge of her chair. Really? Who? Margaret leaned forward slightly, studying Evelyn's face. Isabella D'Angelo. Ever heard of her? The question hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and charged. Evelyn's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain calm. I think so, she said slowly, her voice steady despite the turmoil brewing inside her. Wasn't she some big opera star a while back? Margaret nodded, watching Evelyn closely. Yeah, she was incredible, but then she disappeared. No one knows why or where she went. Evelyn shrugged, feigning nonchalance. Maybe she got tired of the spotlight. Fame can be exhausting. Margaret tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. That's what I thought too. But here's the thing. I looked her up recently, watched some old recordings, and, well, let's just say your voice sounds awfully familiar. For a split second, panic flashed across Evelyn's face. Then, quickly regaining her composure, she let out a nervous laugh. "You're kidding, right? Me? An opera star? Come on, Margaret." But Margaret didn't laugh. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, opening a video clip she'd saved earlier. Without saying a word, she handed it to Evelyn. Reluctantly, Evelyn took the phone and pressed play. The screen lit up with footage of Isabella D'Angelo, on stage, resplendent in a shimmering gown, her voice soaring through the area with breathtaking clarity. Evelyn's hands trembled as she watched, memories flooding back in vivid detail. The roar of applause, the weight of expectations, the relentless pressure to be perfect. When the clip ended, she handed the phone back to Margaret, her expression unreadable. "Well?" Margaret asked softly. "Care to explain?" Evelyn sighed deeply, running a hand through her hair. For a moment, she considered denying everything, making up some excuse to brush it off. But looking into Margaret's kind eyes, she realized she couldn't. Not anymore. "All right," Evelyn admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're right, that's me." Margaret's eyes widened in shock, though not entirely out of surprise. Deep down, she'd suspected the truth, but hearing Evelyn confirm it was still overwhelming. "So, you're Isabella D'Angelo?" Evelyn nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I was. A long time ago." "What happened?" Margaret asked gently, sensing the pain behind Evelyn's confession. Evelyn hesitated, gathering her thoughts. It wasn't one thing, it was everything. The constant touring, the media scrutiny, the pressure to always be flawless, and then personal stuff. Things fell apart, both professionally and personally. I couldn't take it anymore. So I left, changed my name, moved here, and tried to start over. Margaret listened intently, her heart aching for Evelyn. "Why didn't you tell anyone? You could have kept singing, just on your own terms." Evelyn shook her head, her voice tinged with sadness. "I didn't want to risk being found. I needed a clean break. Music. It was too tied to everything I wanted to escape." Margaret reached out and placed a reassuring hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "I get it. Really, I do. But, Evelyn, look. Around you. These people, they don't care about fame or accolades. They just love music and they love hearing you sing. Isn't that worth something?" Evelyn stared at the floor, her mind racing. She'd spent years running from her past, convinced that stepping back into the spotlight, even in a small way, would reopen wounds she wasn't ready to face. But Margaret's words struck a chord. Maybe it didn't have to be about fame or perfection. Maybe it could simply be about sharing a gift she'd been given. "I'll think about it," Evelyn said finally, her voice soft but resolute. "No promises, though." Margaret smiled warmly. "That's all I'm asking." Over the next few days, Evelyn wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, the idea of singing publicly again terrified her. What if someone recognized her? What if the attention brought back all the things she'd worked so hard to leave behind? But on the other hand, she couldn't deny the spark of excitement she felt whenever she joined the choir. Singing alongside others, blending voices in harmony. It was different from anything she'd experienced before. There was no judgment, no pressure to perform perfectly, just pure, unfiltered joy. Her turning point came unexpectedly during a quiet afternoon at home. As she sorted through boxes in her attic, she stumbled upon an old photo album she hadn't opened in years. Flipping through its pages, she was greeted by images of her former life, standing on grand stages, posing with fellow performers, accepting awards amid thunderous applause. But mixed among those glamorous snapshots were candid moments, a backstage, hug with a colleague, a playful selfie with friends, a quiet smile shared with a mentor. Those pictures reminded her of the parts of her career she'd loved, the camaraderie, the passion, the sheer magic of creating something beautiful. Tears streamed down her face as she closed the album, realizing she didn't have to let go of all of it. She could honor the joy music had once brought her without letting it consume her again. With newfound resolve, she made a decision. The following Monday, Evelyn arrived at rehearsal early, clutching a sheet of music in her hands. When Margaret spotted her, she raised an eyebrow in curiosity. "What's this?" she asked, gesturing to the paper. Evelyn took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I've decided to sing at the concert, but only if we keep it low-key. No announcements, no special treatment. Just me doing my part." Margaret beamed, her eyes shining with pride. "Are you sure? This is a big deal." "I'm sure," Evelyn replied firmly, though a hint of nervousness lingered in her voice. "Music was a part of me for so long. Maybe it's time I let it be a part of me again, in my own way." As the news spread among the choir members, excitement rippled through the group. Everyone rallied around Evelyn, offering support and encouragement. They rehearsed tirelessly, fine-tuning every note until the piece sounded seamless. And throughout it all, Evelyn found herself smiling more often, her confidence growing with each passing day. Still, she insisted on keeping her identity a secret. "If anyone asks," she told Margaret, "just say I'm a local volunteer with a knack for singing. That's all I want to be." Margaret promised to respect her wishes, though she couldn't help but feel a twinge of disappointment. Part of her longed to share Evelyn's story with the world, to celebrate the return of a true talent. But she understood the importance of trust and vowed to protect Evelyn's privacy at all costs. As the concert date drew nearer, anticipation built within the town. Flyers were posted in shop windows and chatter filled the streets. No one outside the choir knew about Evelyn's involvement, but whispers hinted at a surprise performance that would leave audiences speechless. For Evelyn, the looming event brought a mix of excitement and dread. She knew she couldn't hide forever, but for now she was content to focus on the music and the simple joy of connecting with others through song. Little did she know, the night of the concert would change her life in ways she never imagined. The morning of the concert dawned bright and crisp, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of salt water through the air. Evelyn woke up early, her stomach churning with nerves. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, rehearsing tirelessly with the choir, but nothing could fully calm the storm of emotions brewing inside her. As she stood by the window, watching the sun rise over the ocean, she wondered if she was making a mistake. "This is just a small performance," she whispered to herself, trying to ease the tension gripping her chest. "It's not like anyone will recognize me." But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. Singing in front of an audience, even one as modest as the townsfolk, felt like stepping back onto a stage she'd vowed never to return to. The thought terrified her, yet there was also a flicker of excitement, a tiny spark reminding her why she'd fallen in love with music in the first place. By mid-afternoon, the community center buzzed with activity. Volunteers scurried around, setting up chairs, adjusting microphones, and hanging colorful banners. Margaret flitted between groups, her energy infectious as she rallied everyone together. When she spotted Evelyn lingering near the entrance, she hurried over, beaming with enthusiasm. "You ready?" Margaret asked, her eyes sparkling with encouragement. Evelyn gave a weak smile. "As ready as I'll ever be." Margaret squeezed, her arm reassuringly. "You're going to be amazing. Just remember, it's not about perfection. It's about sharing your gift with people who truly appreciate it." Evelyn nodded, though doubt lingered in her mind. She glanced at the makeshift stage, where the choir was gathering for a final sound check. Her palms were sweaty, and her heart raced as she imagined standing under the spotlight, exposed and vulnerable. As the evening approached, the auditorium filled with eager attendees. Families settled into their seats, chatting animatedly while children squirmed in anticipation. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the grand opera houses Evelyn once performed in. Backstage, the choir members huddled together, exchanging nervous laughter and last-minute tips. Evelyn kept to herself, pacing quietly as she went over the lyrics in her head. Finally, the lights dimmed, and Margaret stepped onto the stage to introduce the program. Her voice echoed through the room, welcoming everyone and expressing gratitude for their support. Then, with a dramatic pause, she announced the highlight of the evening, a solo performance of O mio babbino caro. And now, Margaret said, her tone brimming with excitement, please welcome someone very special to our community, a talented singer whose voice has already touched our hearts. A ripple of applause spread through the audience as Evelyn took a deep breath and stepped into the spotlight. For a brief moment she froze, overwhelmed by the sight of so many faces staring back at her. Then, remembering Margaret's words, she closed her eyes and focused on the music. The pianist began playing the opening chords soft and lilting, and Evelyn let the melody guide her. When she opened her mouth to sing, the world seemed to fade away. Her voice soared effortlessly, rich and resonant, filling the room with a warmth that left everyone spellbound. Each note carried emotion, longing, hope, vulnerability, as if she were pouring her soul into the song. Tears welled up in some listeners' eyes while others sat perfectly still, captivated by the sheer beauty of her performance. By the time she reached the final crescendo, the entire hall was silent, holding its collective breath. Then, as the last note hung in the air, the audience erupted into applause. People rose to their feet, cheering wildly, their faces glowing with admiration. Evelyn stood there, stunned, as wave after wave of appreciation washed over her. She had expected polite clapping, maybe a few compliments afterward, but this was something else entirely. Margaret joined her on stage, grinning from ear to ear. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up once more for our incredible soloist. Evelyn bowed awkwardly, her cheeks flushed red. She wanted to retreat backstage immediately, but the audience refused to let her go, continuing to clap until she sang a brief encore. By the end of the night, she felt both exhilarated and drained, her emotions swirling in a chaotic mix. After the concert, Evelyn slipped out of the spotlight as quickly as possible, retreating to a quiet corner of the community center. She needed a moment to process what had just happened, to reconcile the shy woman who mended clothes with the performer who had brought an entire room to its feet. Friends and neighbors soon found her, showering her with praise and questions. That was unbelievable, one woman gushed. Where did you learn to sing like that? Have you ever thought about going professional? Another chimed in. Evelyn smiled politely, deflecting their curiosity with vague answers. It's just something I used to do, she said repeatedly, hoping to steer the conversation elsewhere. But despite her efforts, rumors began to swirl. Some speculated she must have trained at prestigious conservatories. Others joked that she sounded like a famous opera singer they'd heard years ago. Margaret noticed Evelyn's growing unease and intervened, steering people toward refreshments and giving her a moment to breathe. Later, when they found themselves alone in the rehearsal room, Margaret turned to Evelyn with a knowing look. How are you feeling? She asked gently. Evelyn sighed, sinking onto a chair. Overwhelmed. I didn't expect all of this. Margaret nodded sympathetically. I know it's a lot to take in, but Evelyn, you deserve every bit of the praise you're getting. That performance was extraordinary. I don't want to be extraordinary, Evelyn replied softly. I just want to live a normal life. I understand, Margaret said, sitting beside her. But here's the thing. You can have both. You can share your talent without letting it define you. Tonight proved that. These people aren't judging you or expecting anything from you. They're simply grateful for what you gave them. Evelyn considered Margaret's words, her expression thoughtful. Maybe you're right. Maybe I've been running from something I shouldn't have. Margaret placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Only you can decide how much you want to share. But I hope you'll keep singing, not because you have to, but because it makes you happy. In the days following the concert, Evelyn found herself reflecting on Margaret's advice. The outpouring of love and support from the town had touched her deeply, reminding her of the joy music could bring, not just to herself but to others. She realized she didn't need to choose between her past and her present. Instead, she could find a balance, embracing her gift in a way that felt authentic and fulfilling. One afternoon, while walking along the beach, Evelyn stopped to watch the waves crash against the shore. She pulled out her phone and played a recording of her performance, listening intently. For the first time in years, she didn't feel ashamed of her talent. Instead, she felt proud of how far she'd come, and excited about the possibilities ahead. When Margaret called later that week to ask if she'd consider joining the choir permanently, Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said firmly, a smile spreading across her face. "I'd love to." From that day forward, Evelyn became an integral part of the community, sharing her voice in ways that brought people together. Though she remained guarded about her past, she no longer saw it as something to hide. Instead, she viewed it as a chapter in her story, one that had shaped her but didn't define her. And as she stood on stage during future performances, surrounded by friends and neighbors who cheered her on, Evelyn knew she had finally found peace. Not as Isabella D'Angelo, the opera star, but as Evelyn Harper, the woman who dared to sing again. The weeks following the concert brought a new rhythm to Evelyn's life. Word of her breathtaking performance spread like wildfire through the small coastal town, sparking conversations at every corner. Neighbors who had barely noticed her before now greeted her with wide smiles and warm compliments. Shopkeepers would stop her on the street just to say how much they'd enjoyed her singing. Even the local baker started slipping an extra pastry into her bag, insisting it was on the Yao house. At first, Evelyn found the attention overwhelming. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, even on such a small scale, and she worried that too much curiosity might lead people to uncover her past. But as time went on, she realized the admiration was genuine. These were kind-hearted folks who simply appreciated her talent and wanted to celebrate it. Slowly, she began to let her guard down, allowing herself to bask in the warmth of their affection. Margaret played a big role in helping Evelyn adjust to her newfound popularity. She made sure no one pressed her for details about her background, gently steering conversations away whenever they veered too close to uncomfortable territory. More than once, she reminded the choir members, and anyone else who would listen, that Evelyn valued her privacy and deserved respect for it. "You don't need to know everything about someone to enjoy what they bring to the table," Margaret said during one rehearsal when a newcomer asked if Evelyn had ever performed professionally. "All that matters is the joy she shares with us." Evelyn overheard the comment and gave Margaret a grateful smile. It was moments like these that solidified their bond, turning it into something deeper than mere friendship. Margaret became not just a supporter but a protector, shielding Evelyn from anything that might threaten her peace of mind. As Evelyn settled into her role within the community, she discovered a side of herself she hadn't seen in years. Singing. With the choir awakened a sense of purpose she thought she'd lost forever. Unlike the high-stakes performances of her past, where every note felt scrutinized and every mistake magnified, this was different. Here, music was about connection, about bringing people together and creating something beautiful without fear of judgment. She threw herself into rehearsals with renewed energy, offering guidance to newer members and experimenting with harmonies during breaks. Her confidence grew with each passing week, and soon she was taking on more challenging pieces, even suggesting songs that pushed the group out of its comfort zone. The choir responded enthusiastically, rising to meet her expectations and surprising themselves with how much they could achieve. One evening, after a particularly spirited practice session, Margaret pulled Evelyn aside. "You've really come into your own, haven't you?" she said with a proud grin. Evelyn laughed, brushing off the compliment. "I'm just having fun. That's all." "Fun?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "You're inspiring everyone around. People are showing up early, practicing harder, all because of you." "I doubt that," Evelyn replied, though a hint of pride crept into her voice. "They're doing it for themselves. And maybe a little for you too," Margaret countered. "Either way, it's working. You've brought a whole new energy to this group." Evelyn didn't argue further, but she couldn't deny the truth in Margaret's words. For so long, she'd kept her gift locked away, afraid of what might happen if she let it shine. Now, seeing how it touched others, she wondered why she'd waited so long to share it again. Despite her growing comfort within the choir, Evelyn still wrestled with lingering fears. Every knock on her door or unexpected phone call sent her pulse racing, convinced someone had uncovered her secret. She avoided interviews with local newspapers and politely declined invitations to perform solo at other events, no matter how tempting they seemed. Margaret understood her hesitation and never pushed her beyond what she was ready for. But then came the day when Evelyn's past caught up with her in an unexpected way. It started innocently enough. A letter arrived in the mail addressed to Isabella D'Angelo. At first, Evelyn assumed it was junk mail meant for someone else, but when she opened it, her blood ran cold. Inside was a formal invitation to a prestigious gala honoring legendary figures in the arts. The organizers hoped she would attend, both to receive recognition for her contributions to opera and to inspire future generations. Evelyn stared at the invitation for a long time, her hands trembling. How had they found her? Had someone leaked her story? Or was it simply a coincidence, a random attempt to track down a missing star? Her first instinct was to throw the letter away, to pretend it had never arrived. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the memory of standing on those grand stages, feeling the rush of applause wash over her. Or maybe it was the realization that running from her past hadn't erased it. It had only made her feel incomplete. That night, unable to sleep, Evelyn called Margaret. They met at the cafe near the community center, where Evelyn confessed everything: the invitation, her fear, her confusion. Margaret listened patiently, her expression thoughtful. "What do you want to do?" she asked finally. "I don't know," Evelyn admitted, tears welling up in her eyes. "Part of me wants to ignore it, but another part, I can't explain it, Margaret. It's like there's this piece of me that's still tied to that world. If I don't face it, I'll always wonder what might have been." Margaret nodded slowly. "Then maybe you should go. Not for them, for yourself. To make peace with who you were and decide who you want to be moving forward." "But what if it ruins everything?" Evelyn whispered. "What if people here find out and treat me differently?" "They won't," Margaret assured her. "Because you'll tell them first. On your terms. And they'll understand, Evelyn. These are good people. They care about you, not some name or title." The decision wasn't easy, but with Margaret's encouragement, Evelyn agreed to attend the gala. In the weeks leading up to the event, she worked closely with Margaret to craft a heartfelt message for the townsfolk. Together, they organized a special gathering at the community center, inviting everyone who had supported her since she arrived. On the evening of the Yadi announcement, the room buzzed with anticipation. Evelyn stood at the front, her heart pounding as she looked out at the sea of familiar faces. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. "Many of you know me as Evelyn Harper," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "And that's who I am now, a simple woman trying to live a quiet life. But there's something about my past that I've kept hidden, not because I didn't trust you, but because I needed to protect myself." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then, with a mix of vulnerability and courage, she revealed her true identity. "Before I came here, I was known as Isabella D'Angelo, an opera singer who traveled the world performing on some of the biggest stages. But fame came at a cost, and eventually I walked away from it all. This town has given me a second chance, a chance to rediscover the joy of music without the pressure of perfection." The room fell silent as Evelyn finished speaking. For a moment, she feared rejection, wondering if her confession would change how people saw her. But then, one by one, they began to clap. The applause grew louder, filling the space with love and acceptance. A few people even stood up, giving her a standing ovation. When the noise finally subsided, Margaret stepped forward, her eyes glistening with tears. "We're proud of you, Evelyn. No matter what happens next, remember that you'll always belong here, with us." The gala turned out to be a bittersweet experience for Evelyn. Walking back into the opulent world of opera stirred memories she'd tried to forget. The chaos, the pressure, the loneliness. Yet it also reminded her of the passion that had driven her to pursue music in the first place. Standing on stage to accept her award, she spoke candidly about her journey, thanking those who had supported her and encouraging aspiring artists to stay true to themselves. By the end of the night, Evelyn felt lighter, as if shedding a burden she'd carried for far too long. Returning home, she realized she no longer feared her past. Instead, she embraced it, as a chapter in her story that had shaped her into the person she was today. And when she sang at the next community concert, surrounded by friends and neighbors who cheered her on, Evelyn knew she had finally found balance. She was no longer running from who she was or hiding from who she could be. She was simply Evelyn Harper, a woman who dared to sing again. The months that followed Evelyn's return from the gala brought a quiet transformation to her life. She had walked away from the event with more than just an award. She carried with her a renewed sense of purpose and clarity. The experience had forced her to confront the parts of herself she'd long tried to bury, the ambition, the vulnerability, the love for performing, but it had also shown her that those pieces didn't have to define her anymore. They were simply part of who she was, woven into the fabric of her story. Back in the small coastal town, Evelyn resumed her routine, but things felt different now. People greeted her not just as Evelyn, the seamstress and volunteer, but as someone they admired deeply for her honesty, her resilience, and her gift. Yet, despite the shift, nothing truly changed in how she lived her day-to-day life. She still mended clothes, baked pies for neighbors, and showed up faithfully to choir rehearsals. What did change was the way she saw herself, and the way she allowed others to see her. Margaret noticed this transformation immediately. Evelyn seemed lighter, freer, as though a weight she'd been carrying for years had finally lifted. Her laughter came easier. Her smile reached her eyes more often, and she no longer hesitated when asked to take on challenging solos during performances. It was as if revealing her past had given her permission to step fully into her present, to embrace all facets of herself without fear or shame. One crisp autumn morning, Margaret approached Evelyn while she was folding fabric scraps at the community center. "You know," Margaret said with a mischievous grin, "you've inspired me to dream bigger." Evelyn looked up, curious. "Oh, what are you planning now?" Margaret leaned against the table, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "I want us to do something special for the holiday season. Something that brings the whole town together. Not just the choir, but everyone. Maybe even raise some funds for charity while we're at it." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Sounds ambitious. What did you have in mind?" "A winter concert," Margaret replied confidently. "But not just any concert. An evening under the stars, with lanterns strung up, hot cocoa stands, and maybe even a bonfire. We'll perform classic carols along with some of our favorite pieces, and you—" She paused dramatically, pointing at Evelyn. "We'll close the show with a solo." Evelyn chuckled, shaking her head. "Of course I will. You couldn't resist, could you? It's tradition now," Margaret exclaimed, laughing. "Besides, people would be disappointed if you didn't sing." Though Evelyn teased Margaret about her relentless enthusiasm, she couldn't deny the appeal of the idea. The thought of bringing the entire town together for such a magical evening filled her with warmth. For once, she didn't feel burdened by the idea of singing in front of a crowd. Instead, she felt grateful for the opportunity to share her voice, for the community that had embraced her so completely, and for the chance to create something meaningful with them. As plans for the winter concert took shape, the town rallied behind the project with remarkable energy. Volunteers sprang into action, stringing fairy lights through trees, building wooden stages and setting up stalls for local artisans to sell handmade goods. Children helped decorate banners, while older residents shared stories of holidays past, adding a nostalgic charm to the preparations. The sense of unity was palpable, and Evelyn found herself swept up in the excitement. Rehearsals became a daily affair, with the choir meeting late into the evenings to perfect their harmonies. Evelyn threw herself into the process, helping newer members find their confidence and suggesting arrangements that highlighted each singer's strengths. Her leadership inspired the group, pushing them to achieve levels of excellence they hadn't thought possible. Even those who claimed they couldn't carry a tune discovered hidden talents under Evelyn's guidance. On the night of the concert, the air buzzed with anticipation. Families bundled up in scarves and coats gathered around the makeshift stage, their breath visible in the frosty air. Strings of twinkling lights illuminated the square, casting a golden glow over the scene. The aroma of spiced cider and roasted chestnuts wafted through the breeze, mingling with the sound of cheerful chatter. When the first notes of Silent Night rang out, the crowd fell silent, captivated by the haunting beauty of the melody. Song after song followed, each one met with thunderous applause, but it was clear that everyone was waiting for the finale, for Evelyn's solo. Finally, the moment arrived. As the choir finished their last piece, Margaret stepped forward to introduce Evelyn. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice, warm and full of pride, "tonight wouldn't be complete without a very special performance. Many of you already know her voice. It's touched our hearts and reminded us of the power of music. Please join me in welcoming Evelyn Harper." Our audience erupted into cheers as Evelyn walked onto the stage, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She stood there for a moment, taking in the sight of the glowing lanterns, the sea of smiling faces, and the flickering bonfire in the distance. Then, closing her eyes, she let the music guide her. Her rendition of Ave Maria was breathtaking, each note pure and resonant, carrying emotions too profound for words. Tears glistened in the eyes of listeners as they swayed gently to the melody, lost in its ethereal beauty. When she sang the final line, the silence that followed was almost sacred. Then, as if waking from a trance, the crowd leapt to their feet, cheering and clapping until their hands hurt. Evelyn bowed deeply, her heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was performing for approval or validation. This wasn't about fame or accolades, it was about connection, about sharing a piece of her soul with people who mattered to her. After the concert, Evelyn lingered by the bonfire, sipping hot chocolate and chatting with friends. Parents thanked her for inspiring their children to pursue music. Elderly couples reminisced about concerts they'd attended decades ago, and young adults shyly admitted they'd never appreciated opera until they heard her sing. Each interaction filled her with a deep sense of fulfillment, a reminder that art has the power to transcend barriers and bring people closer together. Margaret joined her eventually, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "So," she said with a playful nudge, "what's next for you? Another secret? Talent we don't know about?" Evelyn laughed, shaking her head. "One revelation at a time, Margaret. Let's enjoy this for now." But privately, Evelyn knew her journey was far from over. Over the past year, she'd rediscovered not just her love for singing, but also her capacity to inspire and uplift others. Whether it was mentoring young singers, organizing community events, or simply lending a listening ear, she realized she had much more to give, and much more to gain in return. Years later, when Margaret retired, the town held a tribute concert in her honor. Evelyn surprised everyone by taking the stage once again, dedicating her performance to the woman who had believed in her when she no longer believed in herself. As she sang, her voice soared with a grace and strength that left the audience in awe. When the final note faded into the night, the room erupted in applause, not just for Evelyn, but for the bond she and Margaret had forged, a bond that had transformed both their lives. As Evelyn stepped off the stage, Margaret pulled her into a tight hug. "Thank you," Margaret whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Evelyn smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "No, thank you. You gave me my voice back." And in that moment, surrounded by the people she loved, Evelyn knew she had finally found peace, not as Isabella D'Angelo, the opera star, but as Evelyn Harper, the woman who dared to sing again.